He spent millions trying to save his son, but a simple act by the cleaning lady left him absolutely breathless. Shattered silence and rubber gloves. Alejandro killed the engine of his Italian sports car, staring up at the looming facade of his estate. The car went quiet instantly, but the chaos in his mind refused to settle. He sat there, gripping the leather steering wheel, taking deep breaths, just stalling for a few more seconds before facing that house. For 2 years now, it hadn't felt like a home, just a cold marble tomb. He loosened his silk tie. It felt more like a noose, and stepped out. His footsteps echoed lonely and hollow against the cobblestone driveway. On paper, he was a man who had it all. Tech empires pulling in millions across 3 continents, the fear and respect of his competitors, and a bottomless bank account. But every time he walked through those massive oak doors, he felt like the poorest man on earth. "Good evening, sir," the butler murmured, materializing from the shadows to take his briefcase. Alejandro just nodded, too drained to speak. "Where's Lucas?" he rasped, his voice thick with exhaustion and stress. "In his room, sir. It's been quiet. Very quiet." That word froze his blood. Quiet. In this house, quiet meant his 3-year-old son was still drowning in that abyss of silence he'd fallen into after his mother's accident. Lucas was a boy made of glass. No words, no play, barely any eye contact. He was existing, not living. Alejandro climbed the grand central staircase, dragging the heavy weight of his failures with every step. He'd hired top-tier specialists, flew in therapists from Switzerland, and filled the nursery with the most expensive high-tech toys money could buy. Nothing worked. The boy remained a beautiful blonde ghost staring into the void. Reaching the 2nd-floor landing, he froze. The door to the master suite, his room, was cracked open. He frowned. Strictly off limits. Nobody was allowed in there at this hour, especially not with the boy. Lucas hated leaving his own room. Panic spiked in Alejandro's chest. Something was wrong. An emergency. He picked up the pace, exhaustion forgotten, driven purely by paternal instinct. He approached the door, heart hammering against his ribs, bracing himself for disaster. Hysterical crying, or maybe a nurse trying to manage a meltdown. He gently pushed the door open. The sight that greeted him stopped him dead in his tracks, stealing the breath right out of his lungs. It was so surreal, so completely at odds with his rigid life, that his brain struggled to make sense of it. Golden warm light spilled through the parted velvet curtains, bathing the room in a soft glow. And there, right in the center of his massive bed, on top of an imported spread worth thousands, was Elena, the new cleaning girl. She was lying face down, sinking into the plush beige duvet. She was wearing her modest sky blue uniform, worn thin from use but kept impeccably clean. But what hit Alejandro like a sledgehammer was her hands. She was still wearing those bright, screaming yellow rubber gloves, the kind used for scrubbing toilets and marble floors. Those workers' gloves were resting on the finest fabric money could buy. By all rights, Alejandro should have been furious. He should have been shouting. A maid sleeping in the master's bed was grounds for immediate termination. But he couldn't move, because Elena wasn't alone. Standing right there next to the bed was Lucas, his son. The boy who couldn't stand being touched, who screamed if anyone dared invade his personal space. Lucas stood there in his little light blue pajamas, the picture of absolute concentration. He was pressing a red plastic toy stethoscope against Elena's back, his brow furrowed in deep, serious thought. He was playing doctor. "Breathe," Elena whispered. She wasn't asleep. Her eyes were closed, but a soft, barely there smile played on her lips. Her voice was a sweet, soothing thread in the silence. "Dr. Lucas, tell me, is my heart sad or happy today?" Alejandro gripped the doorframe for support. His knuckles turned white. Lucas didn't say a word, but he did something Alejandro hadn't witnessed in 2 years. The boy moved the stethoscope gently, pressed it against her back, and then, with a tenderness that tore Alejandro's soul in two, he patted her shoulder with his small hand. And then, Lucas smiled. It was small, shy, but undeniably real. not an empty grimace. He was playing. He was connecting. He was fully present, healing the patient who, even with her yellow scrubbing gloves on, had become the center of his universe. Alejandro felt the strength drain right out of his legs. The room's opulence, the crystal chandeliers, mahogany furniture, and priceless art faded into the background. The entire world narrowed down to the scene before him. A humble maid in her uniform and the heir to a fortune, locked in a game of doctor and patient. The contrast was jarring. It was a clash between cold, inanimate wealth and a moment of warm, human connection. Elena sensed a presence and cracked one eye open when she spotted Alejandro framed in the doorway, his navy suit sharp and his face pale with shock. Her smile died instantly. Pure terror washed over her features. She scrambled off the bed, stumbling in her panic. "Mr. Alejandro," she gasped, clapping her gloved hands over her mouth in horror. "Oh God, it's not what it looks like. But while she panicked, Lucas remained calm. The boy turned to face his father, gripping the toy stethoscope. For the first time in months, the fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by something else. Pride. "Dad," the boy said. The word sounded rusty, unused but unmistakable. "She hurt. I fix." A single, burning tear betrayed Alejandro's composure. Time seemed to freeze. He had thrown millions away, yet the miracle came from the humblest place imaginable. That one word, Dad, hit the room with the force of a gunshot. Alejandro stood rooted to the floor, staring at his son as if he were witnessing a revelation from the heavens. His brain, usually wired for cold logic and corporate strategy, started rewinding frantically, crashing headlong into the impossible truth before him. Flashback to Zurich, 6 months ago. The private clinic with the panoramic view of the Alps. He could see the doctor clearly. Dr. Hoffman, a world-renowned pediatric neurologist, adjusting his gold-rimmed spectacles while studying Lucas's brain scans. "Sir, your son's brain is physically perfect. The damage here is entirely emotional. He has built a fortress to shield himself from the grief of losing his mother. We've tried everything: hypnosis, equine therapy, experimental drugs. Nothing has breached his defenses. Lucas has simply chosen to disconnect. You should prepare for this condition to be permanent." That clinic bill alone was $50,000 for 3 weeks. 0 results. In fact, Lucas came back worse, more withdrawn, terrified of white coats and sterile rooms. Then there was New York. Top-tier behavioral psychologists. Advanced play therapy using AI robots specifically designed to engage traumatized children. Thousands of dollars an hour. Lucas smashed the robot against the wall within 10 minutes. And yet here he was, staring at this. No Ivy League degrees on the wall. No cutting-edge medical equipment. No controlled environment. Just a 24-year-old girl who probably earned less in a month than he spent on a single business dinner, smelling of lavender and cleaning spray. A girl who had broken every rule in the staff handbook by lying on her employer's bed. Elena stood by the bedside now, head bowed and trembling like a leaf. She tore off her yellow gloves as if they were burning her skin and hid them behind her back. Shamed by her status, her poverty, and the guilt of desecrating the boss's sanctuary. "Please, forgive me, sir," she stammered, eyes welling up, terrified of losing the paycheck her family depended on. "I was just dusting the lamps when Lucas came in. He had his little medical kit. He didn't speak, but he pushed me toward the bed and pointed at my back. I realized he wanted to play. I know I shouldn't have. I know my place." Alejandro raised a hand to silence her. He couldn't bear to hear her apologize. Not now. Not when she had just performed a miracle. He walked slowly toward them, his Italian soles sinking deep into the Persian rug. Elena took a shaky step back, unnerved by the intensity in her boss's eyes. She braced herself for a yell, or to be fired on the spot for her audacity. But Alejandro wasn't looking at her with anger. He was looking at her with disbelief and a gratitude so profound it physically ached. He dropped to his knees, not before her, but before Lucas. He leveled his gaze with his son's. The boy didn't flinch. Instead, Lucas held his ground, stepping slightly in front of Elena like a tiny guardian. "Did you fix her, champ?" Alejandro asked, his voice cracking, terrified the spell might break. Lucas nodded solemnly and placed the stethoscope back on Elena's leg. "All better," Lucas said. Alejandro closed his eyes and exhaled a shaky breath. The irony was crushing. He had truly believed money could fix anything. He thought his son needed the absolute best, and in his world, the best always meant the most expensive, the most exclusive option money could buy. He had suffocated Lucas's world with clinical detachment, bringing in endless lines of aloof specialists who viewed the boy as a medical puzzle rather than a broken soul. Elena, however, didn't approach him with a clipboard, nor did she treat him like the heir to a fortune. She simply saw a lonely child, desperate for a playmate. She met him right where he was, throwing herself onto the mattress, uniform and all, and handing him the reins in a life where he usually felt completely powerless. Her simple, grounded warmth had accomplished what the cold arrogance of modern medicine could not. In that fleeting moment, those yellow rubber gloves, emblems of toil and service, held more value than every single stock option in Alejandro's portfolio. "Don't you dare apologize, Elena," Alejandro said, rising to his feet and truly meeting her gaze for the first time since she had started working there. He was struck by the color of her eyes, a deep, honey shade, filled with fear, yet radiating kindness. "Never apologize for this." Elena blinked, caught off guard by his intensity. "But, sir, the bedspread, my uniform, "You made my son speak," he cut in sharply. "I have poured millions into renowned experts who couldn't even get a grimace out of him. And yet here you are, just playing pretend." Elena looked down, her cheeks burning. "Sometimes children don't need doctors, sir. Sometimes they just need someone willing to let them do the healing. Lucas has so much love locked away inside him, and he had no one to give it to." The words hit Alejandro like a physical blow. So much love locked away. He, the boy's own father, had been so consumed by his own grief and the demands of his empire, obsessed with fixing the child, that he had forgotten to simply love him. "Thank you," Alejandro murmured. It was a phrase he rarely used, and certainly never with such raw sincerity. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Elena's terror evaporated, giving way to a nervous, shy hesitation. For a split second, Alejandro felt drawn to that simplicity, to the light she radiated that finally made this sterile, luxurious chamber feel like a home. But peace is a fragile thing in a mansion built on secrets and ruthless ambition. Before Alejandro could utter another word or ask how she had reached the boy, the sharp staccato of high heels striking the hardwood hallway shattered the moment. The cadence was rapid, aggressive. Alejandro stiffened. He knew that stride all too well. Lucas recognized it too. His little face crumpled, the smile vanishing instantly as terror flooded back into his eyes. The boy released Elena's hand and scrambled backward, cowering behind the bed frame. "Alejandro!" Camila's shrill, demanding voice echoed from the corridor. "I've been waiting for you in the drawing room for 20 minutes. What on earth are you doing in here?" Camila framed herself in the doorway, dressed to kill in a designer gown that likely cost more than Elena's parents' entire home. Her cold gaze swept across the room in a single, calculating second. She took in Alejandro with his loosened tie, the hiding child, and, most offensive of all, the help standing right next to the master bed. Seeing Elena's slightly disheveled hair and flushed cheeks, Camilla's expression shifted from surprise to venomous rage. She didn't see a breakthrough. She didn't see a healing child. All she saw was a presumptuous nobody invading her territory. "What is the meaning of this?" Camilla shrieked, storming into the room like a hurricane and stabbing a perfectly manicured finger in Elena's direction. "What is this filth doing in our bed, Alejandro? Is this exactly what it looks like?" The fragile moment of connection shattered into dust. The war for the soul of this household had just begun. A stain on silk, a scream in the silence. Camilla's presence filled the room like a toxic vapor, choking out the delicate warmth that had bloomed only seconds before. Alejandro felt a knot tighten painfully in the pit of his stomach. He looked at his fiancée, but the elegant woman he planned to marry was gone. All he saw now was a threat. Camila marched toward the bed, her eyes locked on the rumpled sheets and, more specifically, on Elena, who was trying to shrink into herself, backing up against a padded headboard in a desperate attempt to vanish. "I asked you a question," Camila screamed, her voice ricocheting off the walls with such a piercing pitch that Lucas clamped his small hands over his ears. "Why is this woman rolling around in our marriage bed? It's absolutely revolting." Shaking like a leaf, Elena scrambled off the mattress, her feet desperately searching for the floor. "Miss Camila, please, let me explain," she pleaded, her voice a fractured whisper. She tried to hide the yellow gloves behind her back, suddenly painfully aware of how ridiculous and out of place they looked amidst such obscene luxury. "The boy, Master Lucas." "Don't you dare speak my stepson's name with that filthy mouth," Camila cut her off, stepping dangerously close. The height difference, exaggerated by Camila's stilettos, was terrifying. The woman wrinkled her nose as if she had just stepped in something rotting. "You smell of bleach and poverty, yet you have the audacity to lay your body on Egyptian silk that costs more than your entire life." Alejandro shook off his stupor. His protective instincts flared to life, though confusion still clouded his judgment. "Camila, enough," he said, stepping forward to place himself between the two women. "It's not what you think. Elena wasn't doing anything inappropriate. She was playing." Camila let out a dry, humorless cackle and turned her perfectly made-up face toward Alejandro, staring at him with a mix of disbelief and disdain. "Playing? Alejandro, did you hit your head or something? Since when does the hired help get to have playtime in the master bedroom?" She spun toward the bed and, with a violent, theatrical gesture, ripped off the duvet where Elena had been lying, tossing it to the floor like it was toxic waste. "This is contaminated. I'll have to burn all the bedding. God knows what kind of diseases or parasites these people drag in from their slums." The comment was so cruel, so unnecessarily sharp, that Elena felt hot tears stinging her eyes. She pressed her lips together to hold back a sob. She needed this job. Her mother's insulin depended entirely on that paycheck. She couldn't fight back. She had to swallow the poison. But the violence of the moment was too much for someone else to bear. Lucas, who had been crouching behind the nightstand, watched the woman screaming at them. He watched her destroy the stage of his game, the sanctuary where his patient had been healed. The boy, who had been a frozen statue for 2 years, finally shattered the ice. He bolted from his hiding spot and slammed into Elena's legs, wrapping his arms around her knees with desperate strength. He buried his face in the blue uniform apron, seeking refuge, inhaling the very scent that Camila despised. "No!" Lucas screamed. It was a choked, guttural cry, but it carried an infinite weight of anguish, leaving a sepulchral silence in its wake. Camila stood paralyzed, staring at the boy clinging to the servant, while Alejandro felt his heart stop all over again. It was the second time he had heard his son's voice in 10 minutes, but Camila's reaction wasn't joy. It was pure, unadulterated jealousy. Seeing the boy, who always treated her with icy indifference, show such affection for the cleaning girl was a devastating blow to her ego. "Let her go!" Camila shrieked, her elegant composure completely cracking. She lunged down and grabbed Lucas by the arm, yanking him roughly away from Elena. "Let go right now. She's going to make you filthy, Lucas." "She's a nobody, ma'am. Just the help." "You're going to hurt him," Elena cried out instinctively, reaching to shield the boy and forgetting her place for a split second. "Don't touch me," Camila shrieked, slapping Elena's gloved hands away. "Alejandro, are you just going to stand there while this intruder tries to steal your son? Look at her twisting his mind. She's brainwashing him against me." Lucas dissolved into tears. It wasn't his usual quiet whimper. This was a scream of sheer terror and pain. He kicked and thrashed, fighting desperately to get back to Elena. Alejandro's blood ran cold. Seeing his son dragged across the floor finally shattered his paralysis. "Let him go, Camila!" Alejandro roared. His voice, the one he used to command empires, thundered through the room. Startled, Camila released her grip. Lucas hit the carpet, sobbing, then scrambled on all fours to dive behind Elena's legs for safety. The scene was a heartbreaking disaster. A billionaire heir clinging to the housekeeper for dear life, terrified of the woman meant to be his mother. Alejandro ran a hand through his hair, distraught. He looked at Elena. Shame burned on her face, yet her trembling hand still gently stroked Lucas's blonde locks, soothing him even as Camilla glared daggers at her. "Elena," Alejandro said, trying to steady his breathing. "Please, leave us. Go to the kitchen." Elena nodded, keeping her gaze down. She gently pried herself away from the child. "It's all right, Dr. Lucas," she whispered, meant for his ears only. "Everything is okay. I have to go prep the operating room." The little game worked. Lucas let go, though his small arms remained outstretched, his face a portrait of total abandonment. She bobbed a quick curtsy, avoiding Camilla's eyes, and fled the room, taking the only warmth this house had known in years with her. She stumbled at the doorway, dropping one yellow glove. No one moved to retrieve it. It lay on the threshold, a silent casualty of the war that had just raged inside. Camilla smoothed her dress, her icy mask sliding back into place, though her eyes still burned with fury. Alejandro knelt to pick up his son, who was now weeping softly. Lucas allowed it, but he didn't wrap his arms around his father. He held himself stiffly, staring at the empty doorway where Elena had vanished. "We need to talk, Alejandro," Camilla said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "We are settling this in your study right now, and I do not want the boy watching. This charade is over." The ultimatum hung in the air like poison in a crystal glass. Alejandro's study felt less like a workspace and more like a shrine dedicated to masculine isolation. The shelves were suffocated by unread leather-bound volumes. The gas fire offered no real warmth, and the mahogany desk was so massive it felt like it put entire time zones between him and the rest of humanity. His hands carried a subtle tremor as he poured 2 fingers of scotch into heavy crystal tumblers. He downed his own in a single swallow, praying the burn in his throat would cauterize the memory of his son's disappointed stare. Camilla refused to take a seat. Instead, she paced before the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the shadowed grounds, moving with the predatory grace of a stalking tigress plotting her next kill. She knew the clock was ticking. The scene she had witnessed upstairs wasn't just touching, it was a threat. If that cleaning girl succeeded where expensive specialists had failed, she would gain leverage. And Camilla was not in the business of sharing her throne. "Do you actually grasp the severity of this situation, Alejandro?" she asked, pivoting with practiced poise. She held her drink like a scepter rather than a beverage. "I walked into our sanctuary, our private bedroom, and found a complete stranger in our bed." "She was with Lucas, Camilla," Alejandro countered, collapsing into his leather armchair as if the weight of the world sat on his chest. "You heard him. The boy actually spoke. He said, 'heal.' He hasn't uttered a syllable in 2 whole years. You completely missed the point." Camilla rolled her eyes and set her glass down on the desk with a sharp, definitive clack. "It means she is a master manipulator. Alejandro, for heaven's sake, you run a multinational empire. Stop being so incredibly naive. People like her," she waved a hand with dismissive disdain. "They have a shark's instinct for blood in the water." She saw your desperation regarding the boy and recognized a golden ticket. Alejandro frowned. "A ticket to what? She makes minimum wage." She was playing with a toy stethoscope, for crying out loud. "To win your favor," Camilla snapped, leaning over the desk and invading his personal boundaries. "It starts with winning over the child to make herself essential to the household. Next comes the sob story about her sick mother or debts, and before you know it, she's asking for a loan. Or worse, crawling into your bed. And trust me, the boy won't be invited to that party. It is the oldest hustle in the book, Alejandro. The savior nanny trope. It is a cliché, and you are walking right into the trap." Alejandro felt a prickle of doubt. Camilla's words were laced with venom, yet they found the cracks in his armor. He inhabited a universe where everyone always had an angle, chasing his money, his influence, or his network. It was entirely possible that Elena had orchestrated the whole thing, that her gentleness was nothing more than a performance. But then the memory of Lucas's smile surfaced, a genuine expression that couldn't be manufactured. She isn't a nanny, Camila. She is the housekeeper. She isn't even supposed to be near him. It was an accident. Precisely. She cut him off, sharp as a knife. And that accident proves she is a liability. She has zero qualifications, Alejandro. She isn't a child psychologist or a teacher. She scrubs toilets for a living. Are you seriously going to entrust the mental stability of your son, your sole heir, to an uneducated nobody? What if she fills his head with nonsense? What if she infects him? You saw her hands, Alejandro. It is completely unsanitary. Alejandro massaged his temples, trying to dull the throbbing migraine behind his eyes. So, what is your solution? The boy seeks her out. He responds to her. Camila smiled. It was time to play her ace. She circled the desk to stand behind him, placing her hands on his tension-knotted shoulders and kneading them with calculated tenderness. My darling, I only want what is best for Lucas and for us, she whispered against his ear, shifting her tone from aggressive prosecutor to nurturing partner. We cannot go on living like this, with the house in total disarray and the hired help crossing lines they shouldn't even look at. I have been making some inquiries. Do you remember St. Pierre, that exclusive boarding school in Switzerland? Alejandro stiffened under her touch. I told you I refused to send him away. He is far too young. They have a revolutionary new program, she insisted, lowering her voice to a murmur. It specializes in severe childhood trauma. The absolute finest clinicians in Europe reside on campus. He would be surrounded by experts in a sterile, controlled environment, safe, secure, and far removed from vulgar influences and painful memories. Alejandro stared blankly at the dark grain of the mahogany. Sending Lucas away meant outsourcing the problem, paying the highest tuition on earth, and simply waiting for them to ship back a fixed child. It was the easy exit, the standard procedure for everyone in his social tax bracket. If he leaves, Alejandro started. If he leaves, we can finally begin our real life together, Camila interrupted, planting a soft kiss on his cheek. No more screaming fits, no more stress. We could travel. We could finally be the power couple we were meant to be, while Lucas heals among people of his own station. Camila pulled away and walked toward the exit, knowing exactly when to withdraw to let the seed of doubt take root. She paused with her hand on the brass knob. It is either her or us, Alejandro. I cannot live in a house where I am disrespected and where the servants run the show. You need to terminate her employment first thing tomorrow. For Lucas's sake, sever this unhealthy attachment before it is too late. She slipped out, the latch clicking shut, leaving Alejandro standing alone in the shadows. Staring into the amber depths of his scotch, all he saw looking back was a spineless coward. Every instinct he had, the part of him that witnessed the miracle in that bedroom, screamed at him to chase after Elena, to beg her to stay, and to triple her salary if that's what it took to keep Lucas happy. But then the pragmatist took over. The wealthy industrialist terrified of scandal and devoted to status. And all he could hear was Camilla's warning echoing in his mind. She is playing you. She is uneducated help. How can she possibly build a future for my son? He dragged himself out of the chair and drifted heavily toward the window. Below, the faint glow of the staff quarters cut through the darkness at the edge of the estate. A solitary lamp burned in a tiny window. He pictured Elena inside. Was she weeping over the dismissal or plotting her next grift? Just as Camila had predicted, a cold, slimy suspicion coiled around his heart. The terror of being conned by a sweet, humble face began to outweigh the miracle of finally hearing his son's voice. Alejandro pulled out his mobile, checking the time before dialing his chief of staff. It was 11 at night. Yes, Mr. Alejandro? A groggy voice answered on the second ring. He swallowed hard, stealing one last glance at Elena's window while the image of those yellow rubber gloves on the silk sheets flashed in his mind. Camila's shrieks about hygiene and order rang in his ears. Draft the severance paperwork, Alejandro said, his voice void of emotion. For the new maid, Elena. But sir, she only started last week, and her references are Just do it. Alejandro cut him off, squeezing his eyes shut as a wave of nausea hit him. He knew he was making a colossal mistake. It felt like the worst decision of his life, but the wheels of his privileged world were already turning. And call Switzerland. Tell the headmaster at St. Pierre we are taking the slot for next month. He hung up, leaving the room in a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy quiet of betrayal. He had just bartered his son's breakthrough for a quiet life with his fiancée, but he had no idea that fate had drafted a much crueler itinerary for the following day, a lesson that no amount of wealth could prevent. It would involve knees on cold marble and a wall of glass. Morning broke over the estate in a shade of leaden gray, as if the sky itself was mourning the injustice about to unfold. Alejandro was gone before first light, a cowardly retreat masked as an urgent board meeting. He could not stomach looking Elena in the eye, nor could he face the accusing silence of his son. He simply left the signed termination order on the butler's desk. Immediate dismissal. Generous severance. Gone before dinner. Camila, however, was not satisfied with a simple exit. Sending Elena off with a fat check was not enough. She needed to break her spirit. She had to ensure this slum girl understood exactly where she stood in the food chain, so she would never dare look at a man like Alejandro again. By 10 that morning, Elena stood in the servants' quarters, hands trembling as she folded her uniform. The house manager had delivered the blow. Now, a wave of dizziness washed over her, a lump in her throat making it hard to breathe. Her mind raced. Her mother's insulin prescription waiting at the pharmacy, the overdue rent. "Elena!" Camilla's voice drifted from the doorway, sugary sweet but rotting underneath like a spoiled apple. Elena spun around, eyes cast down. "Good morning, ma'am. I was just packing my things. Mr. Roberto told me that—" "Mr. Roberto follows orders, but I run this house," Camilla cut in, stepping into the cramped room and sneering at Elena's meager possessions. "And I say your shift ends at 5. We are paying you for a full day, aren't we? And in this household, darling, we get our money's worth." "Yes, ma'am. What do you need me to do?" A wicked smile spread across Camilla's face. "The grand ballroom. Let's pretend we hosted a wild gala last night. I want those floors reflective enough to apply my lipstick in them. Oh, but there is one tiny issue. The industrial polisher is broken. You will have to do it by hand, on your knees, like in the good old days. It builds character." 10 minutes later, Elena looked like a speck in the cavernous ballroom, the high ceilings echoing the cold emptiness of the space. Armed with her yellow gloves, a bucket of soapy water, and a stiff, bristled brush, she lowered herself onto the freezing marble. The chill seeped through her trousers, biting into her bones. She began to scrub. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The rhythmic grating of the brush against stone was the only sound in the mansion. Camilla, however, did not leave. She lounged on a velvet sofa nearby, flipping through a fashion magazine with a cup of imported tea in hand, watching Elena toil as if it were a private performance. She reveled in seeing her rival reduced to this, sweating, hair matted to her forehead, just a pathetic blue smudge on the floor. That was the moment Lucas emerged from the shadows of the staircase, his battered teddy bear trailing behind him like a lifeline. His eyes were red and swollen, the evidence of a frantic failed search for Elena in her bedroom. The rhythmic scraping of stiff bristles against the floor drew him toward the living area. When he spotted Elena on her hands and knees, scrubbing violently, his face lit up for a heartbeat, only to cloud over in sheer confusion. Why was his best friend down there in the dirt? Why did she look so broken? Stammering inarticulate sounds, Lucas bolted toward her. Elena snapped her head up, and her heart plummeted into her stomach. She dropped the brush, instinct taking over as she spread her arms wide. "Lucas!" she cried out, momentarily forgetting the tyrant watching from the sofa. "Sweetheart, slow down, it's slippery." But Lucas didn't care. He just wanted to reach his safe harbor. He never made it. Camila surged from her seat, cutting off his path like a bird of prey. She clamped her hands onto his small shoulders, jerking him to a halt. "Hold it right there," she barked. Lucas twisted and fought, his small hands reaching desperately for Elena. "Please, just let him go," Elena begged from the floor, scrambling to stand but losing her footing on the slick, soapy tiles. "Don't you move an inch," Camilla snapped at her. Then she turned her icy gaze to the boy. "And you, young man, look at her. Really look, she is on the floor. That is where she belongs. She exists to wipe up our filth. She isn't your friend, she is the help. And kings do not roll around in the refuse." The sociological weight of her words was too complex for a 3-year-old, but the venom in her voice was a language every child understood. Lucas realized he was being barred from loving her. He felt a cold, invisible iron curtain slam down between him and his nanny. A high-pitched, desperate keen escaped his throat as he looked at Elena with eyes that screamed for rescue. Tears carved paths through the soap suds on Elena's face as she faced the most gut-wrenching choice of her life. If she comforted him, Camilla would call security, she'd be thrown out, and the paycheck meant to keep her mother alive would vanish. If she stayed put, she would crush the boy's spirit. "Lucas," Elena said, swallowing her dignity like broken glass and grabbing the scrub brush. "Listen to the lady. Go upstairs and play. I have work to do." The look of absolute betrayal on Lucas's face shattered her. The boy's arms fell to his sides. He took a staggering step back, feeling the sting of rejection, believing the adult world had once again slammed the door in his face. Camilla let out a satisfied, darker chuckle. "See? She knows her station. Now, get out of my sight." Lucas spun around and scrambled for the stairs, tripping over his own feet, his sobs silent and suffocating. Elena attacked the floor again, scrubbing with a violent intensity, the soapy water now diluted with her own falling tears. Camilla settled back onto her throne, flipping a page of her magazine with practiced apathy. "You missed a spot over there, darling," she said, pointing at empty space. "Put some back into it." It was a golden cage, and the silence was deafening. Dusk settled over the city, bringing a violent thunderstorm with it. On the 40th floor of the Millennium Tower, Alejandro sat in a glass-walled boardroom, encircled by Japanese investors. The air buzzed with talk of mergers, profit margins, and quarterly forecasts. Alejandro offered robotic nods, but his spirit was miles away. His gaze remained glued to his smartphone, which lay face down on the polished mahogany table. A crushing weight sat on his chest, a physical panic he hadn't experienced since the day his wife passed. Did I do the right thing? The question looped in his mind. The mental image of yellow cleaning gloves on a silk bedspread kept overwriting the bar graphs on the presentation screen. "Mr. Alejandro, do you accept the terms outlined in Clause 5? One of the attorneys asked. Yes, whatever you say," Alejandro mumbled, tugging at his constricting collar. He felt suffocated. He needed to get home immediately and ensure Lucas was handling Elena's departure. Meanwhile, the mansion had descended into chaos. Only 1 hour remained before Elena was gone for good. She was hiding in the scullery, drying dishes alongside the cook, desperately trying to run out the clock without another confrontation. Upstairs, Camilla had decided to purge Lucas's room in preparation for his exile to a Swiss boarding school. A massive trunk lay open, and she was tossing the boy's clothes into it with careless efficiency. "It's freezing in Switzerland, so none of this junk is coming," Camilla declared, kicking his beloved teddy bear into the corner. "They'll teach you how to act like a proper little man over there. No more coddling, no more nonsense." Lucas sat on the edge of his bed, rocking his torso back and forth rhythmically. The trauma of the day, Elena's rejection, the shouting, and now this woman invading his sanctuary, was turning his mind into a pressure cooker. "Stop doing that!" Camilla shrieked, annoyed by his self-soothing motion. "You look deranged. Put this on. I need to see if it fits for the flight." She tried to jam his arms into a thick, scratchy wool coat. Lucas felt the walls closing in. The sensation of being restrained triggered a flashback to doctors holding him down for needles. The boy snapped. It wasn't just fear. It was a brutal, full-blown panic attack. Lucas wasn't using words anymore, just screaming in pure, unadulterated terror. He clawed at his coat, scratching his own face wildly in the process, and started slamming his head against the wooden headboard. Thud, thud, thud. "Stop it, you stupid boy!" Camilla shrieked, completely panicked. She wasn't worried about Lucas's well-being. She was worried about the noise. "You're going to wreck the furniture." But Lucas was too far gone to hear her. He hit the floor, shaking uncontrollably and hyperventilating. His lips were already turning a terrifying shade of blue from oxygen deprivation. Instead of comforting him, Camilla's control freak instincts kicked in. She bolted for the door, exited, and locked it from the outside. "You stay in there until you're done acting crazy," she yelled through the wood. "I am not dealing with your tantrums today." Downstairs, the thumping sound was muffled, but you couldn't mistake it for anything else. Elena dropped the plate she was drying. It shattered into a million pieces across the floor. "That's the boy," Elena whispered, her eyes wide. "Don't get involved, girl," warned the cook, an old woman paralyzed by fear. "Madame Camilla is up there. You'll only make it worse. You're already fired. Don't catch a lawsuit on your way out." "He's hurting himself. I know that sound." Elena ripped off her apron. She didn't give a damn about the money or the job anymore. That wasn't just noise. It was the sound of a soul fracturing. Elena sprinted out of the kitchen. She tore through the living room where she'd been humiliated just hours before, taking the stairs two at a time. Lucas's screams were gut-wrenching now, punctuated by dull thuds against the door. "Open this door!" Elena screamed as she hit the hallway. Camilla stood guard in front of the locked room, arms crossed, pale but arrogant. "Get out of my house! Security!" Camilla hollered. "Remove this psycho! The boy is hurting himself!" "Can't you hear him?" Elena lunged for the handle, but Camilla blocked her path. "It's a temper tantrum. He needs discipline. If you go in there, I swear I'll call the cops and say you attacked me." Elena heard one massive thud from inside the room, followed by a sudden, terrifying silence. Lucas had stopped screaming, and the quiet was infinitely worse than the noise. "Lucas," Elena whispered. True maternal instinct, which comes from love, not biology, took over. Elena looked at Camilla and saw nothing but a hollow, cruel, pathetic woman. Her fear of authority evaporated. "Move," Elena said. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Camilla blinked, stunned by the ferocity in the servant's eyes. "How dare you?" Elena didn't wait. She slammed her shoulder into Camilla with the strength of pure desperation. Camilla wobbled on her high heels and collapsed onto the carpet, shrieking in indignation. Elena grabbed the doorknob. Still locked. "Lucas!" she shouted. "Open up, baby! It's Elena!" No answer. She scanned the area frantically. She spotted a heavy bronze statue on a hallway table. She didn't hesitate for a second. She gripped the bronze figure with both hands. "Are you crazy?" Camilla screeched from the floor. "You're going to break the door. That is private property." "To hell with your property," Elena roared. With a grunt of effort, she smashed the statue's base against the lock. 1, 2, 3 times. The wood splintered. The metal gave way. Elena delivered a final kick and the door flew open. The sight inside froze her blood. Lucas was on the floor, curled into a fetal ball, shaking violently. There was a small gash on his forehead where he had bashed it against the wood. He was ghastly pale, eyes rolled back, trapped in a respiratory spasm. He couldn't breathe. Elena dropped the statue and dove to the floor beside him. "I'm here. I'm right here," she murmured, scooping him up. She pressed him against her chest, rocking him hard. "Breathe with me, Lucas. Look at my hands. Look at me." Elena took one of his freezing little hands and pressed it to her tear-soaked cheek. "It's me. It's your Dr. Elena. Breathe. 1, 2. Slowly, the miracle happened. Feeling her touch, smelling the mix of lavender and bleach, hearing her racing heart, it pulled Lucas out of the trance. He took a massive gulp of air, like a diver surfacing, and burst into tears. But this was normal crying. Tears of relief. He clung to Elena's neck like a shipwreck survivor gripping a piece of driftwood. Elena kissed his head, staining her uniform with the drop of blood from his forehead. "It's over, my sweet boy. Nobody's going to hurt you ever again. I promise." Just then, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Alejandro appeared in the doorway, his face twisted in horror. He arrived just in time to see the shattered door his fiancée on the floor screaming, "Murderer!" and the girl he'd just fired holding his bleeding son, saving his life. Alejandro stood there, turned to stone. Disorder ruled the room, yet the truth cut through the noise with blinding precision. Camilla stood apart, consumed only by her own preservation. Elena remained in the center, her heart bleeding out for the child in her arms. What on earth happened here? Alejandro's voice was barely a whisper. Camilla scrambled to her feet, smoothing her dress, and leveled a shaking finger at the nanny. "That savage attacked me," Camilla gasped, spinning her web of lies. She smashed the door down. She tried to snatch the boy. Look at his forehead. She hurt him. Elena lifted her gaze to meet Alejandro's eyes. She offered no defense. She remained silent, simply pulling Lucas tighter against her chest, shielding him from the toxicity in the room and the father who had let it come to this. Her stare, burning with disappointment and fierce resolve, told Alejandro everything. This was the moment everything fractured. The battle lines had been drawn, and the casualties were evident. The only question left was who would foot the bill. It was a diamond-encrusted trap, a flawless betrayal. The atmosphere crackled with static, a volatile cocktail of fear, rage, and the ragged breathing of four souls standing on a precipice. Alejandro scanned the wreckage, struggling to reconcile the carnage before him with what his heart desperately wanted to believe. The solid timber door, a 200-year-old masterpiece, hung limply from a shattered hinge. On the floor lay his fiancée, the darling of high society, clutching her ankle and sobbing, a performance worthy of an award. And there, in the center, kneeling like a modern-day saint, Elena cradled Lucas, her clothes stained with the blood from his brow. "She is an animal," Camila shrieked, her trembling finger accusing Elena, seizing Alejandro's confusion to plant the seeds of her final deception. "Alejandro, thank God you are here," the woman snapped. She smashed the door. She shoved me. "Just look at what she did to the boy." Ice ran through Alejandro's veins. His gaze locked onto the small gash on Lucas's forehead. Blood. His son was bleeding. "Did you do this?" Alejandro asked, his tone dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. Gone was the grateful father from the night before. This was the voice of a powerful tycoon realizing someone had damaged his property. Elena looked up, her eyes swimming in tears, not of guilt, but of sheer, agonizing frustration. "No, sir, he was hurting himself," she pleaded, the words rushing out with the desperation of someone who knows she is already condemned. "He was having a crisis. She locked him in here. He could not breathe. I had to get in. I smashed the door to save his life." "Liar!" Camilla screeched, standing up with a feigned grimace of pain. "Lucas was perfectly calm. I was just trying on his travel clothes when she barged in screaming, demanding cash, claiming we fired her unfairly and that she was here to collect what she was owed." "Alejandro!" The boy was terrified by her shouting, and he fell. She is the one who hurt him. Doubt, that venomous snake Camilla had been feeding since the previous night, sank its fangs into Alejandro's judgment. He glanced at the bronze statue lying on the floor, the supposed instrument of violence. He studied the intensity of Elena's grip on the boy. Was it a protective embrace or a possessive clutch? "Let go of my son," Alejandro commanded. Lucas only clung tighter to Elena's neck, burying his face in her shoulder and shaking his head furiously. "No," the child whimpered. "Do you see?" Camilla insisted, moving closer to grip Alejandro's arm. "She has him terrified. She has threatened him. Alejandro, this woman is unstable. I warned you. She is nothing but a gutter criminal, and she is not just violent." Camilla paused for dramatic effect, covering her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God. Alejandro, your watch." Alejandro blinked, thrown off by the sudden pivot. "What?" "The Patek Philippe, the one from the private collection. I left it right there on the dresser when I came to find Lucas's clothes. I was about to put it in the safe." Camilla pointed to the bare surface. "It is gone." The accusation landed with the weight of a bomb. Violence coupled with theft. It was the perfect narrative to dehumanize a poor woman in the eyes of a wealthy man. Elena's eyes went wide with shock. The blood drained from her face. "I have not touched a thing. I only came for the boy." "Search her," Camilla ordered hysterically. "I bet she has it in those filthy pockets. She used the chaos to rob you blind, Alejandro. That is why she smashed the door. Not for the child, but to loot the place before storming out." Alejandro felt physically ill. Events were spiraling too fast, yet Camilla's logic, however cruel, possessed a perverse kind of sense. A disgruntled, terminated employee breaks down a door and a valuable object vanishes. "Elena," Alejandro said, taking a tentative step toward her. He wanted to give her a chance. He needed her to tell him it was a lie, to show him empty pockets. "Please, stand up and empty the pockets of your apron." Elena looked at him with a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. It hit her right then. She had already lost. Saving Lucas from choking? Irrelevant. The boy's adoration? Meaningless. To Alejandro, she was just the hired help, and now a suspect. Then there was Camilla, standing there like the picture of high society perfection. Elena rose slowly, keeping her head high, while Lucas clung to her leg, whimpering softly. She reached into the right pocket of her blue apron and pulled out a crumpled tissue. "Just this," she said, her voice steady. "I have nothing else, sir." Camilla crossed her arms, eyes hard. "Check the other one." The left. Elena reached in, frowning. Her fingers brushed against something that didn't belong there. Something cold, metallic, and heavy. Ice flooded her veins. She looked up, catching Camilla's gaze. The woman offered a tiny, triumphant smirk, invisible to Alejandro, but screaming victory to Elena. A setup, pure and simple. She must have slipped it in during the struggle, or maybe when she shoved past earlier. "Show me," Alejandro demanded, watching Elena freeze. His tone turned to granite. Hope evaporated in the room. With a hand shaking violently, Elena revealed the object. Gold and sapphire glass caught the lamp's glow, sparkling cruelly in the dim light. The watch. A $50,000 timepiece sitting in the pocket of a girl who couldn't even afford to keep her electricity running. Absolute silence descended, punctuated only by the relentless rain hammering against the cracked window pane. Alejandro felt it like a physical blow to the gut. The disappointment was visceral, hurting far worse than the theft itself. He felt like a fool, a betrayed fool. He had actually believed this woman had a good heart. He was ready to fight his own fiancée for her, only to find out Camilla was right all along. She was just an opportunist using his son as a shield. "I knew it!" Camilla shrieked, snatching the watch from Elena's palm. "I'm calling the police right now. I want to see this thief in cuffs." Desperate, Elena locked eyes with Alejandro. "I didn't put it there." "Sir, I swear on my life. She planted it on me. It's a trap. I would never steal from you." Alejandro closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. When he opened them, the warmth was gone. In its place was a wall of ice, the same look he gave executives right before firing them for incompetence. "Enough," he said. His voice was calm but deadly. "I don't want to hear another word." "But sir, I said that is enough." He roared the last word, making them all jump. Striding forward, he ripped Lucas's hands away from her and shoved the girl back, putting space between her and his son. "Stay away from him. Forever. You are the vilest thing that has ever walked into this house, exploiting a child's pain just to steal. You're unforgivable." Elena felt the ground beneath her crumble. The theft accusation didn't hurt. What shattered her was seeing Alejandro look at Lucas, convincing himself their bond was nothing but a lie, a criminal's strategy. "Put the phone down, Camila," Alejandro said, turning his back on the maid. "No scandals. I'm not putting Lucas through an interrogation." He glanced at Elena one last time. "Get out. You have 5 minutes to vacate my property. If I ever see you near my son or my home again, I swear I will spend every cent I own to ruin you. And believe me, I have plenty." Elena looked down at Lucas. The boy sat on the floor, staring up at his father in terror, unable to grasp why the good man was kicking out his best friend. "I'm sorry, Lucas," Elena whispered, her heart breaking into pieces. "I'm so sorry." Gloves in the mud, the end of innocence. The expulsion was swift and brutal. She wasn't even given time to pack her things from the servants' quarters. Camilla saw to that personally. While Alejandro stayed behind trying to soothe a hysterical Lucas, Camilla marched Elena down the stairs, escorting her like a dangerous convict.
"Thought you could win, didn't you?" Camilla whispered in her ear as they crossed the expansive marble foyer.
Her voice dripped with malignant satisfaction. "Did you really think you could waltz in here with that poor little angel face and steal my life?" Elena stopped at the front door. She turned to face the woman who had dismantled her entire existence in less than 24 hours. Despite the tears streaking her cheeks, Elena straightened her spine. The dignity of her honesty gave her a stature that Camilla's expensive heels could never achieve. "You won today, ma'am," Elena said, her voice cracking but resolute. "You keep the house, the money, and the man. But there is one thing you will never possess." Camilla raised a mocking eyebrow. "Oh, really? And what's that, you starving wretch?" "That boy's love. Lucas knows who you are, and sooner or later, Mr. Alejandro will open his eyes too. And when he does, your loneliness will be far colder than my poverty ever was." Camilla's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. The truth stung. Furious, she flung the main door wide open. Outside, the storm was raging at its peak. Rain slammed down in heavy gray sheets. "Get out!" Camilla screamed, shoving Elena toward the slick porch. Elena stumbled, hitting the wet cobblestones hard. Icy water soaked through her uniform in a heartbeat. Her palms scraped raw against the rough stone. High above, a scream tore from Lucas's window. A primal, gut-wrenching sound that sliced right through the thunder and rain. "Elena!" She looked up into the downpour, locking eyes with the small figure frantically pounding the glass, his little palms flattened against the pane. Behind him, Alejandro's shadow loomed, pulling the boy back before yanking the drapes shut, sealing the room like a tomb. The physical connection was severed, but that desperate cry seemed to hang suspended in the storm. Elena rose unsteadily to her feet, shivering from a mix of shock and the bone-deep cold. She stared down at her hands. She was still wearing those bright yellow rubber gloves, her second skin, forgotten in the chaos of the moment. Now they just looked like a ridiculous badge of her own naivety. Seized by a wave of heartbreak and fury, she yanked them off and hurled them onto the manor's doorstep, right atop the family crest. They lay there, stark and yellow against the gray slush and mud. Two bursts of color in a suddenly monochrome world. They were the only proof she had ever existed here. Proof that she had cleaned, that she had healed, and that she had been tossed aside like garbage.
"Goodbye, Lucas," she whispered to the wind, turning to walk down the long driveway with nothing. No coat, no umbrella, no money, just the heavy weight of a false theft accusation. Every step tore her further away from the boy who had given her life purpose, and back toward a cold, unforgiving reality. Inside, the house fell quiet again, but the atmosphere had shifted. The silence of apathy had been replaced by the heavy silence of resentment. Alejandro sat on the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands. Lucas had retreated to the farthest corner, huddled under a desk, glaring at his father with eyes full of absolute loathing. Camilla breezed into the room, brushing imaginary raindrops from her dress. "It's done," she sighed with relief. "I've scheduled a disinfection team for tomorrow, and I've already contacted the agency. They're sending a proper professional, an older British woman, someone suitable." Alejandro just stared at the floor, silent. Logically, he told himself he'd done the right thing by protecting his son from an unstable thief, but his gut was screaming that he had just committed a mortal sin. He stood up, walked to the window, and cracked the curtain. In the distance, Elena's tiny figure was vanishing through the iron gates. Then his gaze drifted down to the porch. There lay the yellow gloves in the mud, getting pummeled by the rain. They looked like severed hands reaching out for help. A wave of nausea hit him, and he slammed the curtain shut. "Book the trip to Switzerland," Alejandro said, his voice hollow. "We leave as soon as possible. I can't spend another minute in this house." Camilla smiled at her fiancé's turned back. She had won. The boy would be shipped off. The maid was history, and Alejandro was more vulnerable than ever. Everything had gone perfectly, or so she thought. But Camilla didn't realize that Elena's impact wouldn't just fade away, nor did she know what Lucas was hiding in his pocket. It was a secret gift from Elena given days ago. A small Polaroid of the two of them playing, frozen in a moment of pure laughter. That photo was the seed of his rebellion. The lights in the mansion went out that night, plunging them into a darkness that felt absolute. The only real light had walked out into the rain, leaving behind nothing but a pair of rubber gloves and a broken promise. A tomb-like silence reigned, proving the failure of their wealth. 3 days passed, stretching out like 3 centuries. The mansion, always cold, had transformed into a luxury morgue. The curtains were permanently drawn, choking out any ray of sunlight brave enough to try and enter. The silence was suffocatingly thick, broken only by the rhythmic, monotonous drone of medical machinery. Alejandro sat in an uncomfortable, minimalist designer chair at the foot of his son's bed, wearing the same clothes for 48 hours straight. Stubble darkened his gaunt face. He had aged 10 years in just 72 hours. Before him, Lucas's bed looked impossibly vast. It was a sea of white linen swallowing the boy's frail body whole. Lucas wasn't playing or watching cartoons. He was hooked up to an IV drip. His once rosy skin turned the color of old wax. His eyes were wide open, locked on the ceiling. But the life behind them had vanished. The spark was gone. "Mr. Alejandro," said Dr. Valladares, the city's most expensive pediatrician, snapping his leather bag shut with a soft but final click. Alejandro slowly lifted his gaze, his movements heavy with exhaustion. His eyes were bloodshot maps of sleepless nights. "Tell me there is progress. Tell me the IV drip is actually doing something." The doctor adjusted his spectacles and let out a weary sigh. He looked ill at ease. He wasn't used to failure, especially not with clients who paid their fees in solid gold. "Physiologically, his hydration markers are stable, but I need to be brutally honest with you, sir. Western medicine fixes the machine, but what is happening to your son? That is not in any textbook I own." "Spare me the philosophy lesson," Alejandro exploded, kicking his chair back as he surged to his feet. "I pay you to fix him. He is on top-tier medication. He has nurses watching him 24 hours a day. So why is his light going out?" "Because he has lost the will to exist, Alejandro." The doctor delivered the verdict with clinical ice. "We call it severe anaclitic depression. It strikes children who suffer a traumatic break from their primary attachment figure. The boy has essentially decided to unplug himself. He is grieving himself to death. He isn't starving because of nausea. He is starving because he refuses to eat. He doesn't speak because he believes there is no one worth talking to. If this continues, his heart will simply stop beating out of sheer apathy." Alejandro felt the floor dissolve beneath him. He stumbled to the bedside and engulfed Lucas's limp little hand in his own. It was ice cold. "Lucas," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Champ, please. Dad is right here. Look at me. I will get you anything you want. We can go to Disney. We will go to the moon if you want. Just look at me." Lucas didn't even blink. His gaze remained fixed on the ceiling, locked on an invisible spot where, perhaps, he could still see a warm smile and a pair of yellow gloves. The bedroom door swung open. Camilla swept in, bringing a cloud of expensive perfume that clashed violently with the room's stench of antiseptic and despair. She wore a flawless black cocktail dress and diamond earrings that sparkled with arrogance. "You two are still at it?" Camilla checked her wrist with sharp impatience. "Alejandro, the flight to Zurich leaves first thing tomorrow morning. Dr. Valladares already cleared him for travel with medical support. It is this atmosphere that is making him sick. He needs mountain air, not this constant melodrama." Alejandro turned slowly to face her. For the first time, the veil of infatuation lifted, and he saw what he had missed. The absolute vacuum of compassion in her eyes. She wasn't looking at Lucas like a dying child. She was looking at him like a piece of damaged luggage that needed to be shipped. "He is dying, Camila," Alejandro said, his voice low and dangerous.
Don't be dramatic, she scoffed, approaching the bed but careful not to make contact. It is just an extended tantrum. Kids are manipulative little things. Alejandro, he is punishing you. Once he gets to boarding school and realizes his tricks won't work, he will start eating again. Trust me, you will thank me later.
She reached out to straighten his pajama collar, a gesture of control, not affection.
Let's get you looking presentable for the trip, she chirped. I mean looking handsome, darling, she corrected herself with a plastic smile. Then, something small but devastating happened. At the feeling of her touch, Lucas's motionless body reacted. Not with violence. He didn't have the strength for that. Instead, a shudder of pure revulsion rippled through him. The heart monitor, which had been tapping out a slow, steady rhythm, suddenly began to shriek. Beep, 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 beep. Get off him! Alejandro roared, shoving Camilla's hand away. Ow! You are hysterical! She rubbed her wrist, glaring. I was only trying to help. You and this kid are driving me insane. I have the foundation gala tonight, and I cannot show up carrying this negative energy. The gala. Alejandro stared at her in disbelief. My son is hooked up to a machine to keep him alive, and you are worried about a charity dinner? Someone has to maintain this family's image while you wallow in self-pity, she spat with venom. I am leaving. When I get back, those bags better be packed. I am not missing that private jet. She spun on her heel and marched out, her stilettos striking the hardwood floor like hammer blows. The doctor, a silent observer to the chaos, shook his head softly and trailed after her, mumbling something about adjusting the sedative dosage. Alejandro was alone again. He collapsed onto his son's chest, weeping without restraint. Forgive me, Lucas. Please, son, forgive me. I don't know what to do. I have all the money in the world, and I am useless. That was when he saw it. Lucas's right hand, the one without the IV line, was clenched into a tight fist. Alejandro had never tried to open it before, respecting the tiny amount of personal space the boy had left. But now, driven by a painful curiosity, he stroked the rigid fingers. What have you got there, champ? He whispered with infinite gentleness. He began to pry Lucas's fingers open, one by one. The boy offered a faint resistance, but his strength was long gone. As his hand uncurled, a battered square of photo paper tumbled onto the sheets, crinkled and worn soft at the edges from constant handling. Alejandro picked it up, gently smoothing out the creases. It was a cheap Polaroid. The print was murky and out of focus, but the subject was unmistakable. It was a clumsy, off-center selfie. Lucas dominated the frame, grinning wide enough to show off his missing baby teeth, his eyes alight with pure joy. Pressed tight against his cheek was Elena. She was beaming right back at the lens, her hair slightly, wild and messy, flashing a peace sign with a hand clad in a bright yellow rubber cleaning glove. Scrawled across the bottom white border in shaky, permanent marker was a single word. Mom. Alejandro felt a physical blow to his chest, as if his heart were being ripped out without warning. The image was undeniable proof. No manipulation, no malice, just raw, unfiltered love. A love he had thrown out into the cold rain because he trusted a woman who valued a dinner party over a little boy's life. He shifted his gaze to Lucas. A single tear traced a path down the boy's temple. Lucas wasn't staring at the ceiling anymore. His eyes were locked on the photo in his father's grip, begging without making a sound, "Bring my mother back." Alejandro pressed a kiss to the snapshot before tucking it back into his son's palm, curling the small fingers around it gently. "I promise you, I swear to God, Lucas, I will make this right." He stood up. The tears were gone. In their place, a cold, calculating rage began to solidify. He needed the absolute truth. He had to witness exactly what transpired in that room 3 days ago. He needed justification for the war he was about to wage. Leaving Lucas clutching his lifeline, Alejandro strode toward the security office. The very atmosphere of the house seemed to quake under his heavy footsteps. The master of the house was awake, and the masks were about to come off. He headed for the command center in the basement. It was a climate-controlled fortress, filled with the soft hum of cooling fans and the glow of server racks.
Alejandro stepped inside and threw the deadbolt. No interruptions. He took the chair at the primary command console. His fingers danced across the keys, punching in the master override code known only to him. Access granted. Alejandro took a deep, steadying breath. Terror clawed at his gut. He dreaded proof that Elena was a thief, that his son adored a criminal. But he was far more terrified of the alternative, that he had played the executioner to an innocent woman. Thursday, October 14th, he muttered, scrolling to the date of the incident. 1600 hours. He pulled up the second-floor feed, isolating the corridor angle pointing at Lucas's door and the covert lens inside the master suite. It was a fail-safe he'd installed years ago to protect his art collection, one Camila knew nothing about. He queued up the master bedroom file first. Timestamp 16:15. High-definition footage filled the main monitor. Camila sauntered into the room, alone. No sign of Elena. She made a beeline for the dresser. Alejandro's lungs seized up. He watched her crack open the jewelry case, watched her lift the watch. The Patek Philippe. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed at the pixels. Camila held the timepiece up, admiring herself in the vanity mirror. She smirked. It wasn't a look of appreciation. It was a twisted, calculating sneer. Then, instead of securing it in the safe, as she'd claimed, she slipped it into her dress pocket and walked out. Bile rose in Alejandro's throat. She had the watch all along. Elena had never even touched it. He scrubbed the footage forward to 16:45, the time of the incident. He switched to the corridor feed. The stark black and white view revealed the long, polished hallway. There was Camila, hauling Lucas by the arm. The boy was digging his heels into the carpet, trying to resist, but he was no match for her strength. The hallway mic was live. Alejandro cranked the volume. "I am so sick of you," came Camilla's voice, tinny, distorted, but chillingly clear. "You're useless, just like your mother, always whining." Alejandro clapped a hand over his mouth. He had never heard that tone from her. In his presence, she was the picture of sweetness and infinite patience. On the monitor, Camila shoved Lucas violently into his bedroom. The boy sprawled hard onto the floor. She slammed the door and turned the key with a snap. "Stay in there and rot for all I care," she shrieked at the wood. Alejandro pounded the desk, sending a pen clattering across the surface. "Monster. I was about to marry a monster." The playback rolled on. The timestamp ticked forward. Thuds echoed from inside the room. Lucas banging on the door, his panic rising. Thump, thump, thump. Then Elena appeared. She came sprinting from the service stairwell, apron fluttering, her face a mask of pure terror. "Ma'am!" Elena's voice cut through the speakers. Alejandro watched the tragedy unfold with agonizing clarity. He watched the footage in horror. Elena begging, while Camila stood there with her arms crossed, smirking and physically blocking the door as Lucas gasped for air inside. Then he saw the turning point. The precise moment Elena finally shoved Camila aside. It wasn't an act of violence. It was pure desperation. He watched Elena grab the heavy statue and smash the lock mechanism. She bolted into the room, damn the consequences, focused solely on keeping his son alive. But then, the twisted finale revealed itself. While Elena was frantically tending to Lucas, just moments before Alejandro's own arrival on the tape, a silhouette appeared down the hall. Camila picked herself up, smoothed her hair, and glanced down the corridor to verify that Alejandro hadn't arrived yet. Then, with the sleight of hand of a seasoned thief, she produced the watch from her own pocket. She slipped into the bedroom like a ghost. Creeping up behind Elena, who was distracted, saving a life, Camila slid the timepiece right into the housekeeper's apron pocket. Alejandro hit pause. The screen froze on that damning frame, her hand planting the evidence. In the blurry foreground, Elena wept over his son. Alejandro slumped back in his leather chair, his entire body shaking. It was all a fabrication. Every single word, every fake tear, every nasty accusation Camila had spewed. Elena wasn't a criminal. She was a savior. She had walked into the line of fire to rescue his boy,
fully aware it would cost her everything.
And his repayment? He had shamed her, branded her a crook, and kicked her to the curb like a stray animal.
Guilt slammed into him like a runaway freight train. The image of those yellow gloves lying in the mud flashed through his mind. He recalled the utter disappointment in Lucas's eyes. He had nearly exiled his own son to a foreign land, ripping him away from the one person who actually cared, sentencing him to isolation just to satisfy his secret abuser.
Alejandro stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over with a loud crash.
The trembling stopped. He was a man possessed by a holy mission now. He whipped out his phone and dialed. "Get the car ready," he commanded. His voice was a low growl, barely recognizable. "And I need Elena's address. Her actual home address, not the agency file. Pull her social security records if you have to." He glared at the screen one last time. Camilla's frozen smirk as she framed an innocent woman. "Party's over, Camilla," he muttered to the empty room, "and you're going to pay for every single tear my son cried." Alejandro stormed out of security, charging up the stairs, taking them two at a time. He headed straight for the guest suite where Camilla lay sleeping like a baby, dreaming of Swiss banks and millions. He was about to give her the rudest awakening of her life. Fueled by righteous fury, Alejandro ascended like an avenging angel dragging hell behind him. He didn't run, he stalked. Every heavy step made the old mansion's floorboards groan under his weight. In his right hand, the phone containing the footage felt heavy as a loaded gun. Inside his chest, his heart hammered against his ribs. A volatile cocktail of acid guilt and volcanic rage that had been dormant for years. He reached the guest room door. He didn't bother knocking. Courtesy had no place here. With a savage, decisive kick, he blew the door open. The crash jolted Camilla upright, her pink silk sleep mask slipping as she gasped. "What? Who's there?" She shrieked, tearing off the mask, squinting as the hallway light sliced through the room's darkness. Alejandro marched in and flipped the main switch, instantly blinding her with the sudden glare. As her vision cleared, she saw her fiancé looming at the foot of the bed. But this wasn't the passive, exhausted Alejandro she knew. This was a man with thunder in his eyes, the veins in his neck bulging with tension. "Alejandro?" she started, dropping her voice to that purring, seductive tone she always used. "Baby, you terrified me. What's wrong? Is it the boy? Did the inevitable finally happen?" That question, that sickening, thinly veiled hope that Lucas was finally dead, was the last straw. Without a word, Alejandro strode toward the bench, grabbed the Louis Vuitton suitcase she'd packed for Switzerland, and hurled it against the wall with everything he had. The sickening crunch of expensive leather, slamming into plaster, mixed with the shatter of perfume bottles inside, was deafening. "Have you lost your mind?" Camilla screamed, scrambling back against the headboard and clutching the sheets. "What is wrong with you?" Alejandro shoved the phone screen right in her face, inches from her nose. The video played on a loop, Camilla pulling the watch from her pocket and slipping it into Elena's apron. "I saw it all, Camilla," Alejandro said. His voice was a low, terrifying whisper. "I saw the abuse. I saw you lock him in like an animal. I saw the security footage, Camilla. I saw you stash the watch." The blood drained from her face faster than if she'd been cut open. She opened her mouth to spin a lie, to fabricate some excuse, but the proof was absolute. Her scheming little world just imploded. "Alejandro, wait. Please, let me explain," she stammered, her hands shaking uncontrollably. "I did it for us, don't you see? That woman, she was poison. She was going to tear us apart. You weren't seeing things clearly. I had to intervene to save our future." "Save us?" Alejandro bellowed, his voice shaking the walls. "By torturing my own son?" He gripped her arm, hard, and hauled her out of the bed. "You're hurting me," she shrieked. "Not half as much as you hurt a 3-year-old boy." Alejandro dragged her straight to the exit. He didn't give a damn that she was barefoot or wearing nothing but thin silk pajamas. His mercy was gone, saved entirely for his child and the innocent woman he had cast out into the storm. "You have 5 minutes," he shouted, shoving her toward the corridor.
5 minutes to get your trash out of my house. If I find a single shoe left behind, I'll torch it. And if I ever see you again, Camila, if you dare come near me or my son, I hand this video to the police and every tabloid you're so obsessed with. You want fame? I swear to you, I'll make you famous. You'll be the wicked stepmother everyone loves to hate. Sprawled on the hallway floor, Camila looked up at him and realized the game was over. There were no cards left to play. The fortress of wealth and power she thought she had conquered had just collapsed on top of her. "You're a moron," she spat, crying from rage rather than guilt. "Have a nice life with that broken defect of a child. No one is ever going to love you two. That servant was only after your wallet." Alejandro looked at her like she was something he'd scraped off his boot. "I'd rather be alone for 1,000 years than spend another second with your poison. Get out." He left her shrieking and cursing in the hall, while the staff peeked around corners, silently cheering for the tyrant's downfall. Alejandro sprinted to Lucas's room and burst through the door. The boy was still awake, clutching a crumpled photograph, his eyes locked on the entrance, waiting for a savior. Alejandro moved to the bedside, and with a swift, decisive motion, ripped the tape holding the IV line to the boy's hand. The monitor screamed an alarm, but Alejandro silenced it with a single, violent strike. "It's over, champ," he whispered, wrapping Lucas in a thick wool blanket and lifting him up. He felt weightless, like a fragile bird. No more doctors, no more witches. Lucas looked confused, but a spark of hope lit his eyes. He rested his head against his father's shoulder. "Mama?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Alejandro swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. "We're going to find her, Lucas. We're going to find Elena, and we aren't coming back without her." He carried his son downstairs, storming past Camila, who was hysterically stuffing designer dresses into a garbage bag. Alejandro didn't even glance her way as he marched through the front door and out into the night. Ignoring the chauffeur rushing to help, he approached his armored SUV in the pouring rain. "I'm driving," Alejandro barked. The engine roared to life, and the dashboard glowed. He punched in the coordinates his security team had just triangulated. San Judas District, Sector 4. The Alley of the Forgotten. The name was a warning. It was a red zone where cops feared to tread, and people like him only saw in grim news reports. Alejandro slammed the accelerator. The heavy vehicle tore up the wet asphalt, leaving the mansion in the rearview mirror. They were leaving the safety of their fortress, diving into the city's shadows to find the only light they had left. The drive was a descent into the city's open wounds. As the financial district faded, the neon glow died out, replaced by shattered streetlights and cratered roads. Gleaming skyscrapers gave way to half-finished brick shells, rusted tin roofs, and stray dogs cowering from the storm. Lucas pressed his face against the glass, equal parts terrified and mesmerized. He had never seen the real world before. "Does Elena live here?" the boy asked. "Yes, son. This is where the richest person we know lives," Alejandro replied, stung by the shame of his own ignorance. He had been living in a golden cage. Elena fought for survival here every single day, yet she possessed more heart than his entire social circle combined. The GPS chimed. "You have arrived." Alejandro braked in front of a tiny, weathered house with peeling green paint. The walls were scarred by years of humidity and neglect. A rusted gate guarded a patch of mud that barely qualified as a yard, yet amidst the muck, a few carefully tended flower pots stood defiant. Rain hammered the roof like gravel. Alejandro stared at the structure. It was dark, except for a faint, lonely yellow glow from a side window. "Stay put, Lucas. It's pouring out there." "I'll get the door." "No!" Lucas screamed, clamping onto his father's arm with a grip far too strong for a child his size. "I'm coming too." Alejandro looked down into the steel in his son's gaze and realized leaving him in the car wasn't an option. This was his burden to bear as well. "All right, we go together." Alejandro stripped off his $4,000 cashmere blazer, draping it over Lucas like a protective shell against the storm. He shoved the car door open and stepped straight into the muck. Expensive Italian leather vanished instantly into a pool of grime, ruined in a heartbeat. He didn't even blink. He rushed to the other side, scooped Lucas up, and crushed him against his chest to shield him from the downpour. They sprinted for the front gate. Unlocked. The front door was warped from years of dampness. Alejandro didn't hesitate, rapping his knuckles hard against the wood. Thud, thud, thud. Silence inside, drowned out by the drumming rain and a rumble of thunder in the distance. "Elena!" Alejandro bellowed, hammering the wood now. "Elena, please!" A shuffle from within. Slow, heavy footsteps, followed by a hacking cough. The door cracked open, protesting on rusted hinges. An elderly woman peered out, her face a map of deep wrinkles and exhaustion. She pulled a wool shawl tight around herself, eyeing the drenched stranger and the bundle in his arms with pure suspicion. "Who's there?" "What do you want? We don't have any money," she stammered, fear edging her voice. "Ma'am, I need to see Elena," Alejandro gasped, rainwater streaming down his face. I'm Alejandro, her former employer." The old woman's fear vanished instantly, replaced by cold, hard fury. She flung the door wide. "You," she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You're the devil who tossed her out into the storm like a stray dog. Called her a thief. Get off my porch. You've done enough damage. She hasn't stopped crying for 3 days. She's burning up with fever because of you." She tried to slam the door in his face. "Wait!" Alejandro jammed his expensive shoe into the jamb to block it. He knew it looked violent, but desperation had taken the wheel. "I'm not here to hurt her. I'm here to beg forgiveness. I'll crawl on my knees if I have to. My son, he's fading away without her." The mention of the child made the woman pause. Her eyes dropped to the bundle beneath the jacket. Just then, Lucas poked his head out from under the luxury fabric. He looked a mess, hair wild, skin pale as a sheet, but his blue eyes burned with a frantic need. "Elena?" he whispered to the old woman. Elena's mother gasped, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. The anger etched into her face dissolved the moment she saw the boy's innocence. "Good Lord! Come in, get inside before the poor child catches his death." This was the turning point, the beginning of healing. The interior was cramped and painfully modest, yet scrubbed spotless. The air hung heavy with the scent of medicinal herbs and floor wax. Rainwater dripped from the ceiling into plastic buckets placed with strategic precision. Drip, drip, drip. The rhythm of survival. Alejandro stepped in, feeling like a clumsy giant invading a fragile world. Puddles formed around his shoes, muddying the very floor Elena had likely scrubbed on her hands and knees 1,000 times. "She's back there," her mother said, pointing to a hanging sheet acting as a wall. "She refuses to eat, keeps saying she failed the boy, that if anything happens to him, it's on her soul." The words hit Alejandro like a physical blow, a sharp pain in his chest that nearly brought him to his knees. Here was Elena, sick, destitute, racking herself with guilt, while he, the wealthy titan of industry, was the only monster in the story. Alejandro moved toward the makeshift partition. Lucas squirmed, fighting to get down, and Alejandro gently set him on his feet. The boy wobbled, weakened by days of starvation, but pushed forward. His small hand reached out and swept the curtain aside. Elena lay on a narrow cot, buried under a mountain of threadbare blankets. She was ghostly pale, dark circles bruising her eyes, shivering violently from the fever. Her eyes were shut tight. On the rickety nightstand, right next to a glass of water and some generic pills, sat the yellow gloves. She'd salvaged them, cleaned them. They were the only piece of him she had left. "Elena?" Lucas whispered. Her eyelids fluttered open. For a second, she was sure the fever was playing tricks on her mind. But there he was, the blond boy at the foot of her bed, soaking wet, looking at her like she was a guardian angel. "Lucas?" Her voice was nothing more than a ragged croak. "Elena!" Lucas cried out, launching himself toward the bed. He scrambled up the mattress and collapsed onto her chest, clinging to her with a desperation that finally shattered Alejandro's composure. Elena moved on pure instinct. Her arms, heavy as lead, lifted to wrap around the boy. She buried her face in his damp neck, inhaling the scent of rain and expensive shampoo.
Lucas, my baby, are you okay? What are you doing here?
Tears streamed down her face as she peppered his head, hands, and cheeks with kisses.
I thought I'd never see you again. I thought you were gone forever.
Daddy brought me, Lucas said, pointing a small finger toward the doorway. Elena looked up and froze. Alejandro was standing by the curtain. The arrogant tycoon, the untouchable millionaire, was standing in her shack under a tin roof. His $4,000 suit was trashed, his hair plastered to his skull, and tears were mixing freely with the rain on his cheeks. Alejandro took a shaky breath. He stepped forward, and ignoring the mud, ignoring his pride, ignoring everything he used to be, he did the unthinkable. He fell to his knees. Alejandro dropped to his knees on the freezing concrete right beside his former housekeeper's bed. His head hung low, broken and beaten, yet somehow starting over.
Elena, please, forgive me,
he choked out, his voice cracking under the weight of his guilt.
I was so blind, an absolute fool.
I saw the footage. I saw exactly what Camila did. I know you're innocent, and I know you were the one who saved him. Elena just stared, completely stunned. Her hand instinctively soothed Lucas's back as he sobbed happy tears against her chest.
Sir, please, stand up.
You don't need to do this. Yes, I do, he insisted, refusing to lift his head.
I shamed you. I accused you of the unthinkable when all you did was love my son. There isn't enough money in my accounts to fix the damage I've done.
But I'm not here to ask you to work for me.
I'm begging you to save us.
Finally, Alejandro met her gaze, his dark eyes locked onto her warm, amber ones.
Lucas is fading away, Elena.
The doctors are useless. It's you. You're the only cure he responds to. He paused, swallowing hard. I realized you're the only real thing that's ever entered our lives. Elena looked down at this titan of industry, now brought low. She could have been bitter. She could have thrown him out or screamed about the pain he caused. She certainly had the right. Instead, she looked at Lucas. The crying had stopped. The boy was curled up against her, thumb in his mouth, wearing a look of peace she hadn't seen on his face in years. Her heart, perhaps too big for its own good, simply didn't know how to hate.
Mr. Alejandro,
she whispered,
I don't need your money. I never did. I love Lucas. And if he needs me, I'm not going anywhere. He needs you,
Alejandro said, grasping her hand between his. He felt the rough calluses of hard labor and the burning heat of her fever.
And I think I need you too. Teach me how to be the father he actually deserves. Show me what really matters.
Lucas sat up in the bed, glancing between his kneeling father and Elena. He took his father's hand and placed it directly over Elena's, binding them together.
Family, Lucas stated.
The word hung there. It lingered in the damp air of the small room. Not a friend, not a nanny. Family. It was a verdict, a decree from a child who understood instantly what took adults years to grasp. Alejandro squeezed her hand, and she didn't pull away. A spark passed between them. Not of wild romance, but of deep, mutual recognition. Two damaged souls meeting over the wreckage of mistakes and prejudice.
Come home, Elena, Alejandro urged,
but not as an employee.
Come back as part of us.
We'll take care of you, fix this fever, and look after your mother, too. You'll never want for anything again. I give you my word. Elena smiled through her tears. She glanced at the yellow rubber gloves on the nightstand. She wouldn't need that armor anymore. Now she had strong hands to hold her up.
If Lucas wants to,
she started. Yes, Lucas shouted, bouncing on the bed. Home with Elena. Alejandro laughed, a pure, liberating sound that cleansed his soul. He sat on the edge of the mattress, wrapping his arms around both the boy and the woman. In that humble shack, battered by torrential rain, Alejandro felt truly wealthy for the first time in his life. The storm raged outside, but inside, a permanent peace had finally settled. The deal was sealed not with ink and lawyers, but with tears and forgiveness. It was the dawn of justice, a discovery of real treasure. The rain stopped during the drive back. It was as if the sky, having wept along with them, had decided to scrub the air clean for a fresh start. The armored SUV glided through the massive iron gates, but this time the mansion didn't feel oppressive. It felt like a victory. Alejandro pulled up right in front of the grand staircase. Ignoring the staff, he hopped out and opened the rear door himself. Doña Marta stared at the colossal facade, jaw dropped in intimidation. "Don't worry, Doña Marta," Alejandro said, offering his hand with a grace he usually reserved for high society. "This house is massive, but it's been empty for a long time. With you here, it'll finally be full." Elena stepped out, still weak and leaning heavily on Alejandro. Lucas stuck to her leg like glue, watching his father like a hawk to make sure he didn't let go of his mom. Inside the foyer, the entire household staff stood in formation. They'd heard Camila screaming earlier, seen her get thrown out. Now they watched their soaking wet boss bring the fired maid back in like she was royalty. "Roberto!" Alejandro called out to the head butler. "Yes, sir?" the man replied, eyeing Alejandro's muddy shoes on the pristine Persian rugs. "Get the blue suite ready, the master guest room. I want fresh linens and the heat turned all the way up. And get Dr. Valadares here immediately, not for my son, but for Elena. And have a hot dinner brought up for Doña Marta." "But, sir," Roberto hesitated, glancing at Elena's filthy uniform. "Prepare the blue suite for her." Alejandro stopped, his gaze sweeping across the entire staff. "From this moment on, Elena and her mother are family. Anyone who treats them with anything less than the respect they deserve can pack their bags and follow Mrs. Camila out the door. Is that clear?" A collective, "Yes, sir," echoed through the foyer, accompanied by subtle, knowing smiles shared among the kitchen staff. Everyone knew exactly who the hero of this story was. Week 1. The healing process. The days that followed were filled with a gentle, restorative peace. Elena wasn't allowed to lift a finger. She spent 3 days in bed, fighting off the flu and emotional exhaustion. But she never had to do it alone. Lucas set up base camp right there on the rug of the blue suite, dragging every single toy he owned into the room, refusing to sleep in his own bed. Alejandro ordered a cot placed right next to Elena's. "Dr. Lucas, time for rounds," Alejandro would announce, walking in with a tray of soup and medication. Lucas would grab the spoon with intense seriousness. "Open wide, Elena," the boy commanded. Elena would obey with a weak smile, the color slowly returning to her cheeks with every passing hour. Alejandro sat in a nearby armchair, pretending to work on his tablet, but in reality, he spent hours just watching them, witnessing his son finally bloom. The boy's vocabulary grew daily. The house was no longer filled with screams or heavy silences, but with the sound of laughter. One afternoon, while Elena was taking a nap, Alejandro found Doña Marta out in the garden. The woman was pruning the rose bushes, unable to sit still for even a moment. "Mr. Alejandro," she said, wiping her hands on her apron, "I don't know how to thank you for all of this. The specialists, the food. It is too much, isn't it?" "No, Marta," he replied, stepping closer. "I am the one in debt. Your daughter breathed life back into my son. That is something money cannot buy. But there is something I need to tell you. I've been looking into things. I know the accusation about the watch weighed heavily on you." Alejandro pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Camila tried to sell a story to a tabloid. She claimed I had lost my mind over a thieving maid." Doña Marta's face went pale. "Oh, dear God. That woman is a—" "Relax. My legal team handled it. We showed her lawyers the security footage. If she breathes a word, she goes to prison for child abuse and defamation. She has left the country. She will never bother you again." Marta let out a long sigh of relief. Alejandro looked up toward the window of Elena's room. "Marta, I'm scared." "Scared? You? A man who has skyscrapers named after him?" "I'm terrified that when Elena recovers, she'll want to leave. I know I treated her poorly. I know I failed her. I won't force her to stay, but I don't know if I can handle her walking away." Marta smiled, the wise, knowing smile of a mother who has seen it all. "Sir, my daughter has a good heart, but she isn't foolish.
If she stayed that day to break down the door, it wasn't for the paycheck. And if her eyes light up when you walk into the room, it isn't because of the soup you're bringing. You might be blind to some things, but the heart doesn't lie. Just ask her. Month 3, the transformation. Elena was fully back on her feet. She had tried to put her uniform back on, but Alejandro absolutely forbade it. That uniform was burned, he lied smoothly. In reality, he had just tucked it away. Instead, Elena began her studies. Alejandro covered her university tuition so she could pursue early childhood education, her long-delayed dream. Yet she continued living in the house, not as an employee but as a tutor, a companion, and the emotional anchor of the household. The connection between them deepened slowly, like a controlled fire burning hotter by the day. There were accidental brushes of hands at dinner, prolonged glances exchanged over the top of Lucas's head. They shared movie nights and conversations on the terrace until dawn, talking not about business or cleaning, but about dreams, fears, and history. Alejandro discovered that Elena was brilliant, witty, and possessed a perspective on the world that he, in his ivory tower, had never known. Elena discovered that beneath the expensive tailored suit, Alejandro was a lonely man who simply wanted to protect the people he loved. The turning point arrived on a warm summer evening. They had organized a small birthday party for Lucas. Just the 3 of them and Doña Marta. No high society. Lucas blew out the 4 candles. "What did you wish for?" Elena asked, wiping a bit of frosting off his nose. "That Daddy kisses Elena," Lucas stated with absolute matter-of-factness. A heavy silence fell over the table. Doña Marta let out a soft chuckle and discreetly slipped away to the kitchen to fetch more ice. Alejandro and Elena were left alone, both of their faces turning a deep shade of crimson. Lucas, satisfied with the chaos he had caused, ran off to play with his new toy car. "Kids, they always tell the truth," Alejandro murmured nervously. Elena looked down, fidgeting with her napkin. "Sometimes they ask for impossible things." "Is it impossible?" Alejandro asked. His voice shifted, becoming deep and intense. Elena looked up. "We are from different worlds, Alejandro. People will talk. They will say I'm a gold digger. They will say you married down." Alejandro stood up, circled the table, and offered his hand. "Let them whisper. Let the world say whatever it wants. I spent my whole life obsessing over status, Elena. That arrogance nearly cost me my son. The only rank that matters is standing right here beside you. You're the one with real class, the kind that comes from the soul." Elena grasped his hand and rose to meet him. No more words were needed. He pulled her close, hands finding her waist. This wasn't some polished Hollywood romance scene. It was raw, a desperate, relieved collision. 2 shipwreck survivors finally washing up on solid ground. It was the moment the house's old hierarchy shattered completely, swept away forever by a new democracy of love. Epilogue. 1 year later, we open on the same shot that began this journey, yet everything feels different. The context has shifted entirely. We are back in the master suite, but now the room is bathed in the warm, golden glow of the late afternoon sun. Close up on the bedside table, an elegant glass shadow box. Inside, treated like a priceless artifact, rests a pair of yellow rubber cleaning gloves. A small brass plaque underneath reads, "The hands that saved us." In the background, Elena lies across the bed, giggling. Gone is the stiff blue polyester uniform. She is radiant in a simple, airy white sundress. Her hair, Lucas, now 5 years old and visibly stronger, bounces around her on the mattress. The silence that once defined his play is gone. "Tickle monster attack," the boy yells, diving onto her. Elena bursts into laughter, a sound of pure freedom, of a woman who finally owns her life. "Help! I'm under siege!" she cries out, playfully pretending to be trapped. Alejandro strolls in. The stiff business suit is history. He is in linen trousers and a casual shirt with sleeves rolled up, looking years younger and completely at ease. He is carrying a tray of ice cream bowls. Seeing the chaos, he quickly abandons the dessert on the dresser and charges toward the bed. "Reinforcements have arrived," Alejandro shouts, diving into the pile. They tumble together over silk sheets. Nobody cares about wrinkles or stains anymore. It is just a tangled mess of arms, legs, and joy. As the laughter subsides, they lie back, staring up at the ceiling, catching their breath. Lucas lies between them, holding both their hands. "Dad?" he asks suddenly. "Is it true? Are we rich?" Alejandro turns his head to look at his wife. His gaze drifts to her stomach, where a tiny bump is just beginning to show, the promise of a new life on the way. He looks up into Elena's eyes. The woman who once scrubbed his floors has scrubbed away his sorrow. A genuine smile spreads across Alejandro's face, perhaps the first real one he has ever worn. "Yeah, buddy," Alejandro replies, kissing Elena's forehead. "We are billionaires, not because of the bank account, but because we have something money can't touch." The camera slowly tracks backward, retreating through the bedroom door, drifting down the hallway that once echoed with angry shouts. It glides down the sun-drenched staircase and out into the garden, where Doña Marta is playing with the dog. Fade to black. White text appears on screen. Love doesn't see the uniform. It sees the heart beating beneath it. The end.